So, as I said in the previous video, and the first video of this series, which I'm calling the Ouija principle, Penn and Teller devised a way of showing that in all likelihood what was occurring with the movement of the hands on the pointer was a subconscious, that when they turned around the board, unbeknownst to those participating who had the blindfolds on, the movement of the three hands, the three individuals, and their movements towards the yes and then the no, because they consciously knew that those positions, the last time they saw the board before it was turned around, was that the yes was in that corner and the no was in the opposite corner. And so the nature of the question that was asked, which is an important part of this evaluation, is that the scientist was saying that it was, in a sense, the answer to the question in just yes or no fashion was yes, and indeed all three were aware that the answer would be yes, and so that's where it went. Same with the next question, the answer would be no. Is it science? Well, it is science. But it's inconclusive. It's not enough. It's not thorough enough. And as I've said in other videos, science, when it's examining things of this nature, tend to be very superficial about it, because, let's face it, there's not funding available to really give it thorough investigation in the secular scientific world, where scientists are working to pay their mortgages and other things. They have to work within boundaries and guidelines which are what investors are investing in. So the science is very limited. So I'd like to now talk about my own experience and how I didn't know, as I said in the other video, previous one, what whatever the word is, the scientific word for this movement thing happening. It's all supposed to be in here. So as I showed this Ouija board that I made, this one here, and as I explained at the time, there were only basically the letters of the alphabet in this area with the vowels and numbers, and there was a no and a yes, and a maybe somewhere along there. So that's what I originally made, and it's since developed into something more due to the fact of continuing the communication. Basically, I was encouraged to put symbols in, and basically as I learned, it was more to do with, hey, if you want to communicate, let's make it a device which just doesn't limit what we can communicate, or to the degree that just letters and yes and no and a few numbers would limit. So the principle was that as I was communicating over the days and weeks and months, this evolved to the point where even when the pointer would stop in these places here, it meant something. I had a map, And so it got, as you can see, very complicated and not something you can memorize that easily in the conscious sense of the word, okay? But there's more on the consciousness. It's from a scientific point of view, they talk about subconscious, and as they talk about it, but they name it, but they don't really go into what it is or research it any more than that. It's just a place where you can put things that you can't understand. A bit like the word God is used to explain things that can't be explained easily or looked into easily. But science is about measurement, and you can measure communicating. You can measure what's being communicated. Basically, the Lord is nothing more than a tool in which to measure communication in this sense. Okay, so when I started off, as I say, I had belief systems I had to deal with. I wanted to do this. I felt in myself that it wasn't bad, that it wasn't evil or the devil's tool or anything else like that. Although I can't honestly say that I was totally convinced one way or another. I was just really going on my own intent, and my own intent wasn't bad in a sense. But I went through some precautionary things, some symbolic in making the device that I've shown there. And when the first time we used it, my ex-partner and a friend, a neighbour, we got together and started to use it, and it immediately started to work. Okay, the point it was moving. Okay, so who are we talking to here? And the answer was we were talking to a small girl whose name was Amy, who had died, who had lived in this area where we were doing, had lived in the house where we had were doing the communicating. But in those early days with Amy, and later on, later on she introduced her brother, whose name was William. But with Amy, it was very, the communication was very, very gobbledygook. It was very, not very easy to work with. And I used to get quite angry, you know. There was a time when the pointer kept going to the letter Y and the letter X. Y, X, Y, X. I had no idea. Just imagine what does it mean? Just kept doing it. Months later, it worked out that what was being asked, it was a question. Why cross? Why cross? Why am I angry? Why am I getting upset about this? Why am I getting frustrated? So look, things like that, you tend to, it's a whole different way of communicating, there's no doubt about that. But given the tools, and what I'm saying is that, sure, if you have that classic ABCD, etc., yes, no, bye, etc., you're limiting. You can imagine a telephone conversation or a computer, working with a computer, and I'll talk about more of the relationship with computers and Ouija principle. But for now, we use more language than simple letters. So if you're wanting to communicate with something which you consider as a spirit, or someone who's had a life and then moved on, spirit world, the afterlife, why are we using a tool and yet limiting the function that that tool can actually perform in order to try and communicate? What are you going to expect to come from that communication? When the internet, well, the internet was already around. This was about the year 2000, but I wasn't on the internet at that time. Soon afterwards I did, but at this time, no. And the communication, when I went on, for a couple of years later, many months anyway, I had already been working with this principle for a long time and on a daily basis. and I could see quite clearly I'd been taught through this communication device that, well, inevitably in the end, it wasn't about the spirit world. It was about being in communication with yourself, but a part of yourself that most of us aren't consciously aware of even existing. But I'm sort of jumping the gun a bit there. But what I wanted to say was that when I went in, of course, I started to investigate, and I went to Ouija sites, and one particular site was the Talking Board site, which is one of the major Ouija sites on the internet. And I was trying to explain to people how it was more than, it wasn't a device that talked to the spirit world in the sense, and it could be used a lot. It could be used as a tool. I think as a tool, it's like a hammer. A hammer is created for a certain number of reasons, to bang nails on and what have you, and to use a hammer differently for what it wasn't actually intended to be used for, or could be used for. I mean, it doesn't actually have to hammer just nails in, but where do you draw the line in use of a hammer? That kind of thing. But the moderator, the owner of the site, Talking Boards, prevented me from saying these things to his people, not because he believed in it. He didn't. His attitude was that it worked, but and there were certain rules that you follow, that you shouldn't do this and that with the Ouija board and all of that. But he was like a leader, and he had a following in a sense, and there were things that he didn't want me saying, which may possibly interfere with that process that he was having, and that, you know, to enlighten or tell people my story in order to encourage them to use the device in a different way. So, and that's a bit like with tarot as well. Tarot is a prime example of tarot, is and all of these medium type things, is that people want you to go to them, just as Penn and Teller was saying, spend your money on them, get their interpretation of what's happening for you. With tarot, I learnt, and using tarot, it wasn't a matter of having your reading done, your cards read. You learn to read the cards for yourself. That is the real purpose of any of these tools of interaction and communication. To read them yourself, to not rely on having to go to someone else to give you a reading. You learn yourself, but most people are just too lazy. That's the bottom line. They're too lazy. They'd rather just have the convenience of spending money and getting someone else's opinion on what's going on. So with me, in this sense, what happened, of course, if you look at my videos on strange experiences, there was one experience I had with which I call an ancient grey entity, and I talk about the alien aspect of extraterrestrials, etc. That happened a long time before I decided to make the Ouija board. So obviously I had an intention of sorts to see if it worked, number one, and to see if I could talk with the greys, that aspect of my experience, and try to understand that fully if I could talk. So at some point within the earlier days of this communication, I asked Amy if she knew of the greys, and she said yes, and I said, am I able to talk to one of them? And she said yes. And so I says, well, can I do that now? And yes. And that's when things changed. Suddenly I'm not talking to a wee girl, a small girl who died early in the 1800s. I was talking to a grey, an alien, and therefore the whole pattern changed. And this is where the symbols started to come in. This is where I was encouraged. Yes, where I was encouraged to redefine the board, the communications device, to add the complexities to it, in which I did. Quite nicely suitable for following instructions, and besides which, the mind, if you like, that I was thus communicating with now, from the wee Amy to the grey, whose name was Avet, A-V-E-T, which is interesting in itself. To me, that was, I was now entering into a phase which was more of what I was hoping and thinking that this device could deliver, this into a phase of a more intellectual, graspable conversation, and that didn't let me down at all. And there was a lot of lessons to learn therein when it went up to another level. An example, and this has to do with belief system, and it's a goodie, because during my Christian, especially within the Pentecostal days, where I allowed myself to be saturated with their interpretation, the Pentecostal interpretation of Christianity, there were a lot of conspiracy theories. One major one was the Cosmic Conspiracy, a famous book back in the early 80s. But this stuff was going around, Jesus is coming back soon, UFOs and stuff like that. In this book, the Cosmic Conspiracy, was all about the Illuminati and where the powers that be were taking humanity. Quite fearful stuff in a way, but for me it wasn't. I didn't react so much to that. I take information at face value, but sometimes it gets through and I haven't tested it properly, and I allow that conspiracy stuff to influence the way I am, the way I'm expressing myself. So this was a part of the situation, this particular lesson, and it was my partner and I. One day we used to every morning have breakfast, and in the kitchen we would have communication. It may last for half an hour to an hour, etc. And this particular time, we started the communication. The pointer, and the pointer, by the way, was a little glass. I should have had a little whiskey glass, turned upside down. Because glass on glass, we used to oil the board with a bit of cooking oil, and the glass would be running smoothly. And as I'd say, as the boards, those points I was telling you about, it showed you that even the points started to, it was expressed to us, go the points, and through quite a tedious way, I learned that what was being said was put a meaning to that point, put a meaning to that point, put a meaning to that point. And some of these meanings were like paragraphs, not just words, individual words, but paragraphs. So like I say, I had a little cardboard map so that I knew what it meant, because I can't memorize all of these meanings and stuff. So one of the symbols this morning, it went to straight away, was a symbol for warning. And what warning was in the symbol was, and I'll show it later on, as I show the actual symbols, get a close up of them. And this was on a second board that I've made, which I'll be showing, is that it went to this symbol for warning. And this symbol was a little robot, like Robbie Robot from Lost in Space. Warning. I put that symbol there. That was, and it went to warning, and we're like, what warning? What, you know? Go now, go now. What's happening? What's happening? Just go, warning. Oh, we want to know a bit more. The first thing that came into my mind, conspiracies again, was the Men in Black. Oh, we're mucking around with something here, which we're not supposed to, because it's knowledge that is hidden. It's behind the veil. The veil, in the sense, is the way people normally use Ouija devices. That's the veil. What's behind it? And so, oh, is the Men in Black? You know, are we? Yes. Board. So, oh, right, we got to go now. Yes, right. So we grabbed the board and we left the house, and we went, because we were living in the country at this time. If I remember, I'll get a Google image of it, the area and the place. But we left the house, went out the back, down the road a bit, over through a gate, and down to a little old place that used to be, but it was just used as a storage shed and stuff like that. And we went in there. We put the board down, and there was just this little window of light that shone onto the hay and stuff on the floor of the barney, the derelict place. Put the board down there and resumed communicating. And what was said then was that, ha ha, joke, we win. Well, up to that time, I had learned to trust what was happening here, because it was in line with what was happening out there. It was, in some ways, there were indications of future events which came true. It's complex in itself, because it wasn't word for word, this is going to happen. It was just insight, in a sense, and then hindsight later on was, oh, that's what that communication was saying. So it sort of showed you that there's a future referencing going on as well. But in this case, what I'm saying is I learned to trust quite implicitly what was being said. There was this trust, this relationship was going on, and in one instant it was out the door, because the joke had been played. And I think I sulked for a while after that. Put aside, nah, if you're gonna abuse the trust that we have established, then I'm not interested. Okay, so I put the board away for a while, but in the meantime, because I had the experience, so I'm processing. And what I learned from it anyway was that, hey, look at your beliefs. Look how easy it is to push your buttons to make you panic in this sense, because you believe these things. And that's a valuable part of the lesson that needed to be learned. And this device, using this device, is what taught me that lesson. You know, belief systems and their energy and what can happen. And that's why I'm nowadays so not into this conspiracy theory stuff, and I'll talk about that a bit more later